The recent release of Christopher Nolan's adaptation The Odyssey has brought renewed discussion in terms of the culture war and on the role of media criticism. I wanted to make this video to discuss why media criticism is important, and while engaging with media in culture has far reaching consequences. Right now, it seems that if someone has a complaint about a particular piece of media for whatever reason, their complaint is often reduced or attacked online. In a very small sense, this is sometimes people defending like an animation studio or a corporation, or especially a game studio, to say, well, they worked really hard, so how can you criticize it? But that's kind of a lesser argument. In this video, I want to talk more about that culture war issue, or really that idea that media has the power to impact our daily lives by changing culture, and that as a response, we have to engage with media in order to protect the things we value. The left will acknowledge this themselves through their DEI initiatives, whether that be in movies, games, etc. They'll acknowledge that media is an important avenue for changing culture and pushing a political agenda. However, when someone pushes back against these movies, they won't acknowledge the criticism as an equally valid political tool, but will instead try to reduce it or minimize it to make it seem like it's pointless, unnecessary, or ineffective. When it comes to these arguments, I've seen kind of two main stances. First is kind of the classic example. They'll try to put someone down as a racist, a misogynist, or some other term that they can use to try and discredit the individual. By doing so, they don't seek to engage with the argument itself, but in a way, get out of the argument by attacking the individual's character. This was primarily the tactic of the past, but in recent years, with shifting sentiments, it has become clear that this no longer works. Take, for example, the Disney remake of Snow White, or the video game Concord. In each case, audience pushback had a major impact. Both pieces of media, with extremely high budgets, ended up doing so poorly that real changes were made. The audience's emotions and criticisms were actually felt by the people behind the piece of media. I believe that because of this, the strategy has shifted to what I think is the second and newer tactic. This is what I refer to as diminishing. It seeks to, instead of discrediting, kind of reduce the opponent's argument to something that's so trivial it's not really worth engaging with. By this, I'm referring to the terms right wing complaint culture and right wing grifter. The first term, right wing complaint culture, seeks to minimize the impact of anyone's criticisms by saying that they simply like to complain. I believe this has two sources. One is a strategic move to invalidate criticism. The second term, right wing grifter, is a little bit more insidious or also a little bit more silly. I think, in the first sense, it seems to be this idea of promoting a message that right wing commentators on the internet don't really believe what they're saying. Instead, they complain to a degenerate audience of right wing fanatics because it is somehow lucrative online. This seeks to reduce their argumentation to nothing more than a money grab in order to discredit what they have to say. I believe that the kind of ridiculous side of this argument is that some people on the left genuinely believe it. It's the idea that people on the right couldn't actually believe what they're saying, that in some way there's a cognitive dissonance of seeing right wing ideas in the public space, and because of that, you have to have some way of explaining that they simply can't be true. With that being said, while I think these terms make for poor arguments, I want to address them in this video. And I want to specifically examine the ways that media criticism can be positive and what thinkers of the past can tell us about our current media age. In 1935, completely independent of one another, two thinkers on opposite ends of the world were considering the rise of fascism and the development of new media technology. They were Hasegawa Nyosekan, a Japanese journalist and social critic, and Walter Benjamin, a German philosopher, cultural critic, and media theorist. Both men composed essays related to the new medium of film and their fears concerning the idea of infinitely reproducible art. In his essay, Original Art and Reproduced Art, Hasegawa discusses the difference between direct performance art and mediated art, such as that conveyed via radio, film, television, etc. Hasegawa feared that mechanically reproducible art, such as film, would replace original art, such as theatrical performance. His fears lied in the worry that reproducible art could be edited and changed to take on new and unintended forms. He extrapolated this fear into the future to warn of a day when a piece of art could be manipulated into any form in a believable manner. One example he gives is an early prediction of autotune or a kind of AI voiceover, where he sees a disjointed vocal performance in which the artist just sings various notes at random, that is then cut up and reassembled into any song at the editor's will. Hasegawa concludes the essay by making the argument that original art will always have an appeal due to its transient uniqueness and man's social desire for unmediated contact with the art object. Underlying this discussion of art was Hasegawa's fear of the growing state influence of 1930s Japan, which was headed toward a policy of total war in the 1940s. Hasegawa's concern was that the technology of reproduction would allow for any piece of art, or rather media in general, to be edited and converted into a piece of state propaganda. While it seems the public's desire for original art has indeed faded in favor of reproducible art, Hasegawa's real issue lies with the audience's ability to engage with media itself. In the context of a play, should a performance be something that one disagrees with, they have the ability to stand up and make their voice heard. That might have poor consequences, but they actually have the ability to do so. In a way, the audience has the power to let the artist know what they think. One recent case of this is the Google CEO's commencement speech at the University of Arizona, where he was booed off stage for the entirety of the performance due to his promotion of AI. Contrast this with watching a film at the theater, at your home, or even more so on your phone. There is no one around to hear your criticism, and most of all, the creator, performer, etc., will never be able to hear any of your feelings of discontent. Sitting on your phone and scrolling past something you find upsetting might have some kind of engagement feature, but ultimately, your complaints go nowhere, leading to a feeling of isolation where you don't really have a voice. Benjamin presents an attitude opposite that of Hasegawa by examining mechanically reproduced art through the lens of Marxist revolution. Benjamin introduces the idea that art had ritual value, or rather was created in primitive societies for ritual and social purpose. With the advent of reproduction, art is, quote, emancipated from the parasitical dependence on ritual and takes on a new exhibition value. In other words, the creation of art does not fulfill some purpose in society as the root of its value, but rather its ability to be viewed has value. This change to mechanical reproduction destroys the idea of, quote, authenticity, something he sees as useful politically. He writes, but the instant the criterion of authenticity ceases to be applicable to artistic reproduction, the total function of art is reversed. Instead of being based on ritual, it begins to be based on another practice, politics. Benjamin argues that the mechanical reproduction of art allows for the rise of Marxism, as art is manipulated and exhibited as a political tool, while destroying its cultic value used to further what he feels is fascism. This is much the same argument that gets thrown around today, that appreciating art of the past that has cultural value is supporting fascism in some way. At the same time, he sees the mechanical reproduction of art as liberation from cultic value and as a means of manifesting his Marxist agenda. He writes, the transformation of the superstructure, which takes place far more slowly than the substructure, has taken more than half a century to manifest in all areas of culture, the change in the conditions of production. Here, the term superstructure is used to define the culture, ideology, and systems within a society. He continues, however, theses about the art of the proletariat after its assumption of power, or about the art of a classless society, would have less bearing on these demands than theses about the developmental tendencies of art under present conditions of production. It would therefore be wrong to underestimate the value of such theses as a weapon. They would brush aside a number of outmoded concepts, such as creativity and genius, eternal value and mystery, concepts whose controlled and at the present almost uncontrollable application would lead to a processing of data in the fascist sense, The concepts which are introduced to the theory of art in what follows differ from the more familiar terms in that they are completely useless for the purposes of fascism. They are, on the other hand, useful for the formulation of revolutionary demands in the politics of art. Here, Benjamin directly argues that there's an ongoing culture war being fought in an effort to slowly change the superstructure, or rather the culture, of society towards Marxist revolution. Furthermore, he makes it clear that art is a quote, weapon to be used to fight this culture war. The people he deems fascist appeal to the cultic value of art that ties it to the culture and history of a particular time and place. On the other hand, he argues that the Marxist should use the mechanical reproduction of art to transform art into a political tool whose main function is the promotion of revolutionary ideals. Hasegawa helps to reveal to us what Benjamin apparently fails to see: that mechanically reproduced art, such as film, television, music, and print media, can be used for both fascism and Marxist revolution. They can serve insidious political ends by their ability to create expressly crafted propaganda machines. As a result, Hasegawa advocates for the promotion of original art, as it is not so easily manipulated. A modern example might be any one of the cases where a YouTuber goes on a live stream and reveals a side of themselves that they'd rather have kept hidden. While this might be the case, there's no way to address the issue of the contemporary culture war by advocating for completely unmediated access to media. Most of what we consume is heavily mediated and presented to us in an infinitely reproducible form. What Hasegawa and Benjamin could not anticipate was the role that the internet would play in the context of reproducible art. While the moviegoers and radio listeners of the 1930s had little in the way of challenging what they saw or heard, we now have the ability to do so. By making a video, for example, we are able to directly challenge what was once hidden behind the wall of mediation. An individual can now reach a large audience and gain enough power to stand toe to toe with institutions and media giants. Take, for example, again the game Concord, which invited significant audience pushback for its blatant political and ideological agenda, along with being just a generally bad game. Not only did the game shut down after just 14 days, but the entire studio was closed as a result. The left, like Benjamin before them, see media as the chief weapon to be used in the waging the cultural war, thereby slowly eroding the fabric of Western society through subversive politics. Where they seek to hide behind mediation, institutions such as legacy media and critics, they can be challenged through our capacity for criticism to break through these boundaries. By downplaying or attacking complaint culture, left wing commentators seek to discredit and destroy our only means of engaging with them on equal terms. It's a form of cowardice, where they seek to hide behind the barriers created by reproducible media so as to be free of challenge and criticism. And this brings us back to the Odyssey. As Benjamin prescribed, the film seeks to erode the cultic value of the work of art. In other words, its place in establishing, creating, and maintaining Western values and culture. By making a reproduction of this work and editing its contents to match their political ideology, they slowly shift the superstructure of society toward their radical cause. With every person that goes to see the film, unaware of its subversive nature, perceptions are gradually shifted in the cultural consciousness, until their version of the Odyssey replaces the original work and its value in the mind of society at large. Recently, the buzzword of the day has been fascism, but why this term? It seeks to obfuscate their targeted efforts to change society by painting them as some kind of valiant and necessary effort. They present their subversion of media as a necessary tool for warding off the evils of fascism and an authoritarian state. However, as I hope to have shown in this video, individuals who directly experienced the rise of fascism in the 1930s saw the role of media differently. Hasegawa saw media manipulation as the express tool of the fascist state, not its solution. And at the same time, Benjamin saw it as a means of expressing a different but equally radical and insidious ideology. Because of this, I think media criticism is important and shouldn't be diminished, regardless of what side you're on. It's important to engage with those things we find troubling and speak up when it matters, though historically this has been something the right hasn't done. And now that they are making themselves heard online, it's invited quite a bit of backlash. Because of this, I felt it was necessary to highlight narratives that diminish legitimate media criticism as right wing complaint culture for the weak and intellectually unsound arguments that they are. If you like this video, please consider leaving a like and a subscribe. Thank you.